Welcome back to MJ on Crime. I am your host, MJ. When we think about serial killers, there's this uncomfortable question that always comes up. What makes someone capable of such unspeakable acts? Is it something wired deep in their brains, or is it the world around them shaping who they have become? I've spent a lot of time digging into this, and honestly, it's never as simple as people hope it is. There's no one rule, no single profile. That said, there are some patterns that keep showing up. Take Ted Bundy, for instance. You've probably heard of him. Most people have. He was said to be charismatic, articulate, even charming. And that's precisely what he used to get close to his victims to make them trust him. He didn't look the part of the monster, but inside, well, that's where the darkness lived. It wasn't impulsive violence either. It was calculated, methodical. Then there's Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, if Bundy was calculated, Dahmer was, I'd say, crazy calculated times 10 and compulsive. He targeted people who were vulnerable, people he thought wouldn't be missed. But what really sets him apart is how much control he seemed to want and gain, not just over his victims' lives, but over their deaths too. It's chilling, but in its way, it paints a picture of someone deeply broken, craving connection and control in all the wrong ways, cravings and control that took lives in horrendous ways. Let me tell you about a story a detective friend of mine once shared over a late night cup of coffee. He said it took him back to the early days of his career when he was still learning how to read the perp and trust his instincts. There was this one case that always stuck with him. The suspect on the surface was as ordinary as they come. Polite, friendly, the kind of guy who could put anyone at ease with just a few words. But my friend said that when you looked a little closer, you'd see every detail, every move the man made was carefully set up to manipulate the people around him. He wasn't showy about it, never bragged, never tried to draw attention, but there was a cold, calculating charm about him. My friend said it reminded him of someone like Bundy, only quieter. He told me that catching someone like that is no small feat. It takes patience and the kind of gut instinct you only develop from years on the job. And even then, you're never quite sure if you've caught the whole truth or just the part the perp wanted you to see. Now, the one thing these individuals, these killers, share, besides their actions, is how carefully they mask their true selves. It's not about losing control. It's about having an abundance of control. They know exactly what they're doing. And in their minds, well, they're untouchable. But as history has proved, nobody's untouchable forever. When we start talking about why someone becomes a killer, there's this tug of war between nature and nurture. This is a key discussion had by experts who study serial killers. And honestly, I don't think it's ever just one or the other. A tough upbringing, traumatic experiences, exposure to violence at a young age, all these things mixed together. It's kind of like a recipe, right? You add in all the wrong ingredients, and it can lead to some pretty dark results. Now, forensic psychology plays a big role. It gives us a way to dig into those early warning signs, things that, if caught early enough, might stop someone from going down such a destructive path. Think about neglect or abusive environments. It's not always screamingly obvious, but when you know what to look for, well, you can start piecing it together, like patterns like animal cruelty, fire setting, even bedwetting beyond certain ages. Those can tell you something's off. Not guaranteed, but, indicators do show up, and professionals should explore that. And this gets me, I think you would agree, could early intervention have helped some of these people, these future killers? Could just stepping in at the right moment have changed their trajectory? I have heard stories that go something like this. There was this kid, barely 18. He'd been flagged, anger issues, violent outbursts, the works. However, back then, the system wasn't very effective at following up. They treated him as more of a troublemaker, a child who was a disciplinary problem, rather than someone in real danger of becoming, dangerous. And you know what? Years later, he popped up on the radar again, and by then it was too late. He'd already hurt people and himself. If you were involved in such a story, a parent, a teacher, or even law enforcement, I dare say regrets would stay on your mind for sure. It makes you wonder how different these killer lives may have been if someone had recognized the signs, the red flags, as they say today, and stepped in sooner. Would it have made a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a question forensic psychologists keep coming back to again and again. When it comes to tracking serial killers, the challenges they're like nothing else in law enforcement. You're not just following, connecting dots here. You're piecing together fragments of a puzzle, one that honestly seems like it was not meant to be solved. These individuals, they cover their tracks, they adapt, and sometimes they even taunt their pursuers. It's like a game to them, a twisted kind of chess where every move has to be calculated. But over the years, we've made strides. Advances in forensic science alone have transformed the game. DNA evidence, for instance, that's been a game changer. Back in the day, we didn't have the tools to match a single microscopic hair or a speck of blood to a suspect. Now, well, it's like leaving behind a digital fingerprint, one you can't argue with. Of course, breakthroughs like this didn't happen overnight. Think of cases like the Golden State Killer, right? Decades went by without answers. But then, out of nowhere, DNA genealogy cracked it wide open. Suddenly, a man who thought he'd outsmarted the system for over 40 years was sitting in a courtroom, facing his victims. That's the thing about good detective work. It never really stops. Time, technology, they're on our side. There are these cases where it all comes down to a single overlooked detail. The story goes that investigators have been chasing this perpetrator for months. He was meticulous, a real ghost, barely leaving a trace. But during a routine sweep, one of your fellow investigators found something buried in a trash bin, an old receipt with handwriting. It didn't seem like much, but when investigators dug into it, it led to a hardware store where the suspect bought supplies. From there, he was tracked to a cabin he'd been hiding out in. With that single clue, it became the thread that unraveled everything. But of course, it's not always a Hollywood ending. There are setbacks, moments where the trail runs cold. There may even be mistakes that cost precious time or the whole case. The key is persistence, to be tenacious about the goal. You learn to live with the frustration, the false leads, because the alternative, giving up, isn't an option. That's the legacy of law enforcement's work. You do it for the victims, for their families, and if you're lucky, you stop the next tragedy before it happens. And that's it for today, my friends. Serial killers might think they're untouchable, but history and good detective work proves otherwise. Thanks for listening, folks. Stay curious, stay safe, and as always, we'll catch you next time on MJ on Crime.